The morning started like any other Tuesday. Daniel was running a few minutes late, which meant he'd have to skip his usual coffee stop and head straight to the train station. He worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of job that paid the bills but didn't exactly make his heart race with excitement. At 34, his life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Maybe too comfortable, his sister always said, but Daniel didn't mind. Predictable felt safe. He made it to the platform just as the 7:15 train pulled in. The doors slid open and he stepped inside, finding his usual spot near the window in the third car. He pulled out his phone and opened his audiobook app. He'd been listening to a thriller novel for the past week, something about a detective chasing a mysterious criminal across Europe. It was entertaining enough to make the 40-minute commute pass quickly. The train filled up at each stop, the usual mix of bleary-eyed office workers, students with oversized backpacks, and elderly folks heading into the city for their morning routines. Daniel kept his eyes on his phone screen, nodding along to the narrator's voice through his earbuds. He'd learned years ago that avoiding eye contact meant avoiding unwanted conversations. Not that he was unfriendly exactly. He just preferred his own company during the morning rush. That's when he felt it. A small tug on his coat sleeve. Daniel assumed someone was trying to squeeze past him to reach a seat, so he shifted slightly to the left without looking up. But the tugging continued, more insistent this time. He pulled out one earbud and glanced down. A little girl stood beside him, barely reaching his elbow. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with her dark hair pulled back in 2 neat braids that hung past her shoulders. She wore a purple jacket that looked a bit too thin for the chilly October weather, and her backpack was almost comically large for her small frame, making her look like a tiny turtle carrying its shell. But it was her eyes that caught Daniel's attention. They were big and brown and held a seriousness that seemed wrong for a child her age. Most kids he saw on the train were either chattering excitedly or half asleep against their parents' shoulder. This girl looked wide awake and intensely focused. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, her voice almost swallowed by the noise of the train and the chatter around them. Daniel looked around quickly, searching for whoever was with her. A mother, father, grandparent, anyone. But the people near them were absorbed in their own worlds, staring at phones or out windows. No one seemed to be paying attention to the little girl at all. "Are you okay? Where's your mom or dad?" Daniel asked, pulling out his other earbud and tucking his phone into his pocket. The girl didn't answer his question. Instead, she held up something she'd been clutching against her chest. It was a journal, the old-fashioned kind with a leather cover that had seen better days. The edges were worn and cracked, and the leather had faded from what might have once been a rich brown to a dull, dusty tan. It looked like it had been carried around for years, opened and closed countless times, maybe even dropped in puddles or left out in the sun. "Can you read this for me?" the girl asked, pushing the journal toward him. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it out. "It's important," Daniel hesitated. Every instinct told him this situation was unusual. Where were this child's parents? Why was she asking a stranger to read something? Was this some kind of scam? He'd heard stories about elaborate setups on public transportation, though usually those involved adults, not kids. But there was something in the girl's expression that made him pause. It wasn't the look of a child who'd been coached to approach strangers. It was genuine desperation mixed with hope, like she'd been searching for someone to help her and had finally found them. "Sweetie, I think you should find your mom or dad first," Daniel said gently. "Where are they?" "Are they on this train?" The girl's lower lip trembled, and for a moment Daniel thought she might cry, but she pressed her lips together and shook her head. "There's no one. Just me. Please, sir. I need someone to read this. It's from my mama, and she said it was important. She said someone would understand if they read it." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He looked around again, more urgently this time, hoping to spot a frantic parent searching for their child. Still nothing. The other passengers remained oblivious, locked in their own Tuesday morning bubbles. He crouched down so he was at eye level with the girl. "What's your name?" "I can't tell you that," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder nervously. "Not yet. But please, will you read it, all of it? My mama wrote it, and she wanted someone to know her story. She said the right person would understand." There was something about the way she said wanted instead of wants that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Past tense. He looked at the journal in her small hands, then back at her face. She was trying so hard to be brave, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the dark circles underneath them, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of that enormous backpack. Against his better judgment, Daniel reached out and carefully took the journal from her hands. It was heavier than he expected, packed with pages that had been filled with writing. As he held it, he noticed a faint smell of lavender, like someone had tried to preserve it with scented sachets. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll read it. But you need to tell me where you're supposed to be. Do you have a phone? Someone I can call?" The girl's eyes widened, and before Daniel could say anything else, the train's automated voice announced the next station. She looked toward the doors, then back at him with sudden urgency. "I have to go," she said quickly. "But please read it, all of it." She wanted someone to know. She wanted someone to understand what happened and why things turned out the way they did. "Wait," Daniel said, starting to stand up. "You can't just—" But the train was already slowing down, the brakes squealing as they approached the platform. The girl took a step back, then another. Other passengers started moving toward the doors, creating a small crowd between them. "Please," the girl said one more time, her voice barely audible now. "Read it. There's something important at the end. Something about Mrs. Chen on Riverside Drive, that's all I know." The doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. The girl turned and darted through them, her oversized backpack bouncing against her back as she ran. Daniel tried to follow, but the crowd of departing passengers blocked his way. By the time he made it to the door, the girl had disappeared into the mass of people on the platform. "Wait," he called out, but his voice was lost in the noise of the station. The doors began to close. Daniel had a split second to decide whether to jump off the train and try to find her or stay put. But she was already gone, swallowed up by the crowd, and the train was moving again before he could make up his mind. He stood there for a moment, gripping the overhead rail with one hand and clutching the mysterious journal with the other, feeling completely bewildered. What had just happened? Who was that little girl? And why had she given him this journal? Daniel looked down at the worn leather cover. There was no name on it, no title, nothing to indicate what was inside or who it belonged to. He ran his thumb over the cracked surface, feeling the texture of aged leather under his fingertips. The woman standing next to him gave him a curious look. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said automatically, though nothing felt okay. "Just, yeah." He made his way back to his spot by the window and sat down heavily. The journal felt like it was burning a hole in his hands. Part of him wanted to open it right there on the train, but something held him back. This felt private, intimate. Whatever was written inside, it deserved more attention than a crowded train car could provide. Mrs. Chen on Riverside Drive. The girl had said those words with such emphasis, like they were a clue or a code. Daniel lived on the east side of the city, nowhere near Riverside Drive, but the name Chen tickled something in the back of his mind. Where had he heard that recently? The rest of his commute passed in a blur. He couldn't focus on his audiobook, couldn't even pretend to look interested in the scenery passing by outside. His mind kept replaying the encounter, analyzing every detail. The girl's serious eyes, her trembling hands, the way she'd said, "My mama wanted someone to know" in past tense. When he finally reached his stop, Daniel walked to his office building in a daze. He nodded at the security guard, rode the elevator to the 5th floor, and made his way to his cubicle, all while clutching the journal against his chest. His co-worker, Jennifer, looked up from her computer as he passed. "You okay, Dan? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a weird morning," he muttered, setting his bag down and placing the journal carefully on his desk. He tried to focus on work. He really did. He opened his computer, pulled up his spreadsheets, and stared at the columns of numbers that usually brought him a strange sense of order and calm. But his eyes kept drifting to the journal sitting there next to his keyboard. By lunchtime, he'd accomplished almost nothing. His boss had stopped by twice to ask about a report that should have been finished yesterday, and both times Daniel had to admit he hadn't even started it. This wasn't like him. He was the reliable one, the guy who always met his deadlines, who never let personal stuff interfere with work. But this wasn't exactly personal stuff. He didn't even know what this was. At 12:30, Daniel grabbed the journal and headed to the small park across from his office building. It was one of those pocket parks that cities squeeze between buildings, with a few benches and a sad-looking tree that somehow managed to survive despite the concrete and exhaust fumes. He bought a sandwich from a food cart but barely tasted it as he sat down on a bench. The journal sat beside him, waiting. Daniel took a deep breath and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was immediately striking. It was feminine and flowing, with little loops on the letters that suggested someone who'd learned to write with care and attention. But it was also hurried in places, like the writer had so much to say that their hand couldn't keep up with their thoughts. The first entry was dated 15 years ago. Today, I met the man I'm going to marry. I know it sounds crazy and maybe I'm crazy, but I just know. If you're reading this someday, baby girl, know that love at first sight is real. Your daddy smiled at me in the coffee shop on 5th Street and my whole world changed in that instant. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. This was a mother writing to her daughter. The little girl from the train. This journal was meant for her, filled with messages from her mother. But why had she given it to him? Why had she asked him to read her mother's private words? He kept reading. The early entries were full of joy and hope. The writer, whose name he learned was Elena, described falling in love with a man named David. She wrote about their dates, their dreams, their plans for the future. She talked about wanting to open a small bakery, about finding the perfect apartment with morning sunlight, about imagining a family with maybe 2 kids and a dog. Daniel found himself smiling as he read, caught up in Elena's happiness. But even as he read, he felt a growing sense of dread. He knew somehow that this story didn't have a simple happy ending. The little girl's desperation, her serious eyes, the way she'd spoken about her mother in past tense, all of it pointed to something darker ahead. He checked his watch. His lunch break was almost over, but he couldn't stop reading now. He sent a quick text to his boss saying he wasn't feeling well and would work from home for the rest of the day. Then he kept reading, unable to pull himself away from Elena's words, and that's when the story in the journal began to change. Daniel sat on that park bench for another hour, completely absorbed in Elena's words. The world around him faded away. The traffic noise, the people walking past, the pigeons pecking at crumbs near his feet, none of it registered. He was lost in the story unfolding on those worn pages. The tone of the entries had shifted dramatically. What started as a love story was turning into something much darker, and Daniel felt his stomach tightening with each new page. Elena wrote about small things at first. David forgetting their anniversary, David coming home late without explanation, David snapping at her over little mistakes. She made excuses for him in her writing, the way people do when they're not ready to face the truth. He was stressed about work, she wrote. He had a lot on his mind. Things would get better once he got that promotion, but things didn't get better. Daniel read an entry from about 14 years ago that made him pause. Elena had written, "I found a credit card bill today that I didn't know existed. $15,000. When I asked David about it, he got angry. Really angry. He said I was snooping, that I didn't trust him, that I was ruining our relationship with my paranoia. But I wasn't snooping. The envelope was just sitting on the kitchen counter with the other mail. Am I crazy? Am I the problem here? No, Daniel thought. You're not crazy." But he kept reading, unable to look away. The entries became more sporadic after that. Sometimes weeks would pass between them. Elena wrote about finding strange receipts, about David staying out all night, about money disappearing from their joint account. She wrote about feeling like she was losing her mind, about wondering if she was imagining things or overreacting. Then came the entry that made Daniel's blood run cold. "I followed him today. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't take it anymore. All the lies, all the excuses. I needed to know the truth. He said he was going to a work conference in Boston for the weekend. But I saw him get on a train heading to Connecticut instead. So I bought a ticket and followed him." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he turned the page. He has another family, a whole other life. A woman and 2 kids in a house in Hartford. I watched him walk up to the door and a little boy ran out to hug him. The boy called him Daddy. Then a woman came to the door, pregnant, and David kissed her. Not a quick peck. A real kiss. The kind he used to give me. I stood there across the street for 20 minutes, watching through the window as he played with those kids, as he laughed and smiled like he didn't have another wife waiting for him back home. Like I didn't exist, Daniel felt sick. He looked up from the journal, needing a moment to process what he'd just read. A young mother pushing a stroller walked past, and he found himself wondering about her story. about all the hidden stories people carried with them every day. He took a deep breath and kept reading. Elena's next entry was short and devastating. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. I found out 3 days after discovering David's other family. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to confront him, to scream and throw things and demand answers. But another part of me is terrified. What if he leaves? What if he chooses them over us? At least right now I have something. If I say something, I might end up with nothing. Daniel wiped his eyes, surprised to find them wet. He'd never met this woman, would never meet her. But he felt her pain so acutely it was like a physical weight on his chest. The entries that followed showed Elena's internal struggle. She wrote about her fear, her anger, her shame at staying with a man who was living a double life. She wrote about her growing belly, about feeling the baby kick, about talking to her unborn daughter late at night when David was wherever he really was. I've decided to name you Lily, she wrote, after the flowers that grow in my mother's garden. Lilies are strong. They come back every year, no matter how harsh the winter was. That's what we're going to be, baby girl, strong survivors. But the daughter's name on the journal entries was different. Daniel flipped back to the first page and reread it. She'd addressed it to her baby girl but hadn't mentioned a specific name. Later entries started including a name, Mia. So Lily was her first choice, but something had changed. Daniel continued reading, watching Elena's transformation unfold on the pages. She became harder, more determined. She started hiding money, small amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there. She opened a bank account David didn't know about. She made copies of important documents and stored them at a friend's house. I'm not stupid, she wrote. I know this can't last forever. Eventually he'll slip up, or I'll confront him, or his other wife will find out. When that happens, I need to be ready. I need to have a way to take care of you and me. I won't let us end up on the street because I trusted a man who never deserved that trust. Then came the entry Daniel had been dreading. It was dated about 8 months after the pregnancy announcement. You're here. You're finally here and you're perfect. Tiny fingers, tiny toes. A little button nose that wrinkles when you cry. I've named you Mia Rose. Mia means mine, and you are mine, completely and totally mine. Rose because you're beautiful and delicate. But roses also have thorns. I hope you'll always be strong enough to protect yourself. David showed up at the hospital drunk. He held you for 5 minutes, then got a phone call and left. He hasn't been back in 3 days. I think his other wife just had her baby too. I wonder if he's there with them, playing the devoted father while we sit here alone. Daniel had to stop reading. His lunch break had long since ended, but he couldn't bring himself to care about work right now. He stood up and walked a few laps around the small park, trying to process everything he'd learned. A man was living 2 separate lives, with 2 separate families, and somehow keeping it all hidden. How was that even possible? The logistics alone seemed impossible. The lies he must have told, the schedules he must have juggled, the constant deception. Daniel couldn't imagine the kind of person who could do that. But more than his disgust at David, Daniel felt overwhelming sadness for Elena. She'd known the truth and stayed anyway, trapped by fear and circumstance and the desperate hope that somehow things might change. He sat back down and continued reading. The next few years of entries were heartbreaking. Elena described raising Mia alone, essentially being a single mother while technically married. David would disappear for weeks at a time, then show up with gifts and apologies. Elena kept hiding money, kept making plans, kept surviving. She wrote about Mia's first steps, her first words, her first day of preschool. She wrote about working 2 jobs to make ends meet, while David claimed the construction business he supposedly ran was struggling. She wrote about the joy Mia brought her, about how this little girl was the only thing that made the struggle worthwhile. You smiled at me today, Elena wrote when Mia was about 2 years old. A real big smile that lit up your whole face. And I thought, this is why I keep going. This is why I put up with him and his lies and his disappearing acts. Because you exist. Because you're here. Because you're mine. Then, about 7 years ago, everything fell apart. He's gone, Elena wrote, her handwriting shaky and uneven. Really gone this time. His other wife found out about us. I don't know how, but she did. And David chose her. Of course he chose her. She's the one he loved first. She's the one with the house in the suburbs and the respectable life. We were always just the secret. The mistake he kept hidden. He came by this morning, threw some papers at me and told me he was done. Divorce papers. He's filing for divorce. After everything, after all these years of lies, he's the one filing. Like I'm the one who did something wrong. Daniel felt a surge of anger at this David person, whoever he was. The casual cruelty of it, the selfishness, the complete lack of regard for the family he was abandoning. But Elena's next entry showed a strength Daniel hadn't expected. "I'm done crying," she wrote a week later. "I cried for 3 days straight and now I'm done. I've been preparing for this for years. I have money saved. I have job skills. I have a daughter who needs me to be strong. David thinks he's breaking us by leaving, but he's actually setting us free. For the first time in years, I don't have to lie to myself. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to make excuses for a man who never deserved them. It's just me and Mia now, and we're going to be fine. Better than fine. We're going to be happy." And for a while, according to the journal entries, they were. Elena wrote about building a life for herself and her daughter. She got a better job, moved to a smaller but nicer apartment, enrolled Mia in a good school. She wrote about birthday parties and playground visits and bedtime stories. She wrote about learning to be happy on her own, about discovering she was stronger than she'd ever known. Daniel found himself smiling as he read these entries. After everything Elena had been through, she'd found peace. She'd built a good life for herself and her daughter, but then about 2 years ago the entries changed again. "I've been feeling tired lately," Elena wrote. "Really tired. Not the normal tired from working and taking care of a kid. This is different. This is the kind of tired that doesn't go away no matter how much I sleep. I finally went to the doctor today. They ran some tests. I should get the results next week." Daniel's chest tightened. He knew where this was going. He could feel it in the way the story was unfolding, in the weight of that journal in his hands, in the desperate eyes of the little girl on the train. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later. Cancer. Stage 3. The doctor used a lot of words I didn't understand, but the basic message was clear. It's bad. It's treatable maybe, but it's bad. I asked about my chances and she wouldn't give me a straight answer. That's how I knew it was really bad. Doctors don't avoid questions unless the answer is terrible. Daniel had to stop reading again. He sat there on that park bench, staring at the words on the page, feeling the weight of Elena's pain across time and space. He thought about the little girl on the train, about how young she was, about how unfair all of this was. The subsequent entries detailed Elena's battle with cancer, the chemotherapy that made her violently sick, the radiation treatments that left her exhausted, the hospital stays and the medications and the endless appointments. Through it all, she tried to stay positive for Mia, tried to keep things as normal as possible. "I told Mia I'm sick, but I didn't tell her how sick," Elena wrote. "She's only 6 years old. She doesn't need to know that her mom might be dying. She needs to believe everything is going to be okay. So I smile when she's around. I play games with her even when I can barely keep my eyes open. I read her bedtime stories even when my throat is raw from throwing up. I'm her mom. That's my job, to make her feel safe even when nothing is safe." Daniel checked his phone and was startled to see it was already past 4 in the afternoon. He'd been sitting here for hours, completely absorbed in this stranger's life. He had dozens of missed calls and texts from work, but he ignored them all. This felt more important than any spreadsheet or meeting ever could. He kept reading, racing through the pages now, desperate to understand how this story connected to the little girl who'd approached him on the train. The entries became shorter and less frequent as Elena got sicker. Sometimes weeks would pass between them. When she did write, her handwriting was shakier, harder to read. But her love for her daughter remained constant, appearing in every line. "I'm running out of time," she wrote about 6 months ago. "I can feel it. The doctors don't say it directly, but I can see it in their eyes. The treatments aren't working anymore. I need to make arrangements for Mia. I can't leave her alone. I can't let her end up in the system with no one to love her." Then Daniel reached an entry that made his heart stop. "I found Lily Chen today. After all these years, I found her. We worked together at the hospital 15 years ago. Before everything with David, before all the lies and pain. She was my best friend back then. We lost touch when I got married and moved away. But I tracked her down through old contacts. She lives on Riverside Drive now. I called her and she actually remembered me. After all this time, she remembered. I'm going to ask her to help Mia when I'm gone." Daniel's hands were shaking as he read the name, Lily Chen. The little girl had mentioned Mrs. Chen on Riverside Drive. This couldn't be a coincidence. He flipped through the remaining pages of the journal frantically, looking for more information. The entries were sporadic now, sometimes just a few sentences scrawled across the page. I met with Lily today, Elena had written about 4 months ago. She's older now, like me, but she still has that warm smile I remember. We sat in her kitchen and drank tea, and I told her everything. About David, about the lies, about being sick. About Mia. She cried with me. After all these years, after losing touch, she still cared. She said she'd help. She promised me that if anything happens to me, she'll make sure Mia gets to my mother in Portland. My mom is elderly and can't travel, but she wants Mia. She wants to raise her granddaughter. Lily said she'd make it happen. I believe her. Daniel sat back against the bench, his mind racing. So Elena had made arrangements. She'd found an old friend who'd promised to help her daughter. But something had gone wrong. Otherwise, why would the little girl be alone on a train, asking strangers to read her mother's diary? He kept reading, his heart sinking with each entry. 3 weeks left, maybe 4, Elena wrote. Her handwriting was barely legible now. The hospice nurse says I should start saying goodbye. How do you say goodbye to your 7-year-old daughter? How do you explain that Mommy isn't coming back? I've been writing letters for her. 1 for every birthday until she turns 18. 1 for her graduation. 1 for her wedding day if she chooses to get married. 1 for when she has her first child. I want her to know I'll always be with her even when I'm not. Daniel wiped his eyes. He didn't care that he was sitting in a public park, crying over a stranger's journal. This was one of the saddest things he'd ever read. The next entry was dated 3 weeks ago. I gave Lily the envelope today. Every penny I've saved over the past 7 years. It's not much, but it's something. $3,000. Enough to help with Mia's travel to Portland, to buy her some clothes, to get her started with my mom. Lily tried to refuse it, but I insisted. She has a son, she told me, Daniel. He's an accountant, she said, very responsible and kind. She showed me his picture. He has gentle eyes. I told her about this journal, about how I've been writing to Mia since before she was born. I want Mia to have it someday when she's older, when she can understand. But I'm worried. What if something happens? What if the system gets involved and Mia ends up in foster care before Lily can get to her? I've been teaching Mia to be brave, to be smart, to trust her instincts. That's all I can do now. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. His mind was spinning, trying to piece everything together. Lily Chen had a son named Daniel, an accountant. With gentle eyes, he pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. He scrolled to Mom and stared at the name on the screen. His mother's name was Lily Chen. She lived on Riverside Drive. He was an accountant. Oh my God, he whispered. His mother knew about this. His mother had promised to help this little girl. But somehow the girl had ended up alone, approaching strangers on trains, carrying her mother's journal like it was the most precious thing in the world. Daniel's fingers trembled as he dialed his mother's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. He was about to hang up when she answered. Daniel, is everything okay? You never call during work hours, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. Do you know someone named Elena Rodriguez? The silence on the other end was deafening. He could hear his mother's sharp intake of breath, then a sound that might have been a sob. Where did you hear that name? His mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A little girl gave me a journal this morning, on the train. She just handed it to me and ran off. I've been reading it all day, and Mom, it's her story. Elena's story. She wrote about you. She said you promised to help her daughter. Mia, his mother breathed. Oh God, Mia, where is she? Is she okay? I don't know. She gave me the journal and disappeared at the next stop. Mom, what's going on? Who is Elena? His mother took a shaky breath. Can you come over? Right now? I'll explain everything, but I need you to come over. And Daniel, if you see that little girl again, you call me immediately. Do you understand? She's in danger if she's out there alone. What kind of danger? Just come over, please. The line went dead. Daniel grabbed the journal and practically ran to the nearest subway station. His office, his job, his responsibilities. None of it mattered right now. All he could think about was that little girl's serious eyes, her trembling hands, her desperate plea for him to read the journal. The trip to his mother's apartment felt like it took hours, even though it was only 25 minutes. He kept the journal clutched against his chest, protecting it like it was made of glass. In a way it was. This journal held a woman's entire heart, her love for her daughter, her hopes and fears and dreams. It was precious and fragile and irreplaceable. When he finally reached his mother's building on Riverside Drive, he buzzed her apartment frantically. She answered immediately and buzzed him up without a word. She was waiting at her door when he stepped off the elevator. Lily Chen was a small woman in her early 60s, with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She'd always seemed cheerful and energetic to Daniel, always smiling, always busy with some project or another. But today she looked older, tired, her face creased with worry. "Come in," she said, pulling him inside and closing the door quickly behind him. Her apartment was neat and cozy, filled with plants and photographs and the smell of jasmine tea. Daniel had grown up coming here every Sunday for dinner. This place felt like home, but today it felt different, charged with tension and secrets. They sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had done his homework as a kid, where they'd played cards and shared meals and talked about everything and nothing. "Tell me about Elena," Daniel said, setting the journal on the table between them. His mother stared at the worn leather cover, then reached out and touched it gently, reverently. "We worked together 15 years ago at City General Hospital. She was a nurse's aide, and I was in administration. We became close friends. She was so full of life back then, so hopeful about the future." "She wrote about you in here," Daniel said. "About how you were her best friend." His mother nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "We lost touch after she got married. She moved to a different part of the city, and we both got busy with our lives. I always meant to call her to meet up for coffee, but you know how it is. Time passes and suddenly years have gone by." "She found you again," Daniel said. "When she got sick." 2 months ago, his mother confirmed. "She called me out of the blue. At first I didn't even recognize her voice. She sounded so weak, so tired. She told me she was dying, that she had a daughter who needed help. She asked if I remembered our friendship, if I would be willing to help Mia get to her grandmother in Portland. And you said yes." Of course I said yes. How could I say no? She was my friend, and she was dying, and this little girl needed help. His mother's voice broke. "Elena came here 3 weeks ago. She was so thin, Daniel, so fragile. But she was fighting so hard to stay alive long enough to make arrangements for her daughter. She gave me an envelope with money she'd saved, and she told me about Mia's grandmother in Portland. She made me promise that I'd get Mia there safely, that I wouldn't let her end up lost in the foster care system." "What happened?" Daniel asked. "Why is Mia alone?" His mother buried her face in her hands. "Elena died 3 weeks ago. I went to the funeral. There were maybe 10 people there. It was heartbreaking. After the service, a social worker told me that Mia had been placed in temporary foster care while they sorted out the custody situation. Elena's mother in Portland is elderly and has some health issues, so the process was going to take time. Background checks, home visits, all that bureaucracy. But you had Elena's wishes. You had proof that she wanted Mia to go to her grandmother. I know, but legally I'm nobody. I'm just an old friend. I have no legal standing. The social worker said she'd make a note of Elena's wishes, but that the system had to run its course. She gave me the foster family's information and said I could visit Mia, that maybe I could help ease the transition." "Did you visit her?" "I tried," his mother said, her voice anguished. "I went to the foster home 4 days ago, but they said Mia had run away the night before. She just disappeared. The police are looking for her. Child Services is looking for her, but there's been no sign of her. I've been calling every day, checking every shelter, walking through the neighborhoods near the foster home. I've been out of my mind with worry." Daniel felt cold all over. "She's been on the streets for 4 days? A 7-year-old girl?" "I know," his mother whispered. "I've barely slept. I keep thinking about Elena, about the promise I made her. And I failed. I let her daughter slip through the cracks." "You didn't fail," Daniel said firmly. "You tried. The system failed. But Mom, I found her. Or she found me. This morning on the train." His mother's head snapped up. "What, you saw her? Where is she?" "I don't know. She gave me the journal and told me to read it. She said something about Mrs. Chen on Riverside Drive, and then she ran off at the next stop. I tried to follow her, but she disappeared into the crowd. She was trying to find me," his mother said, her voice filled with wonder and pain. "She was looking for me, but she didn't know which Mrs. Chen or exactly where on Riverside Drive. So she gave you the journal, hoping you'd make the connection." But why didn't she just ask someone for help? Why not go to the police? His mother reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It showed Elena, thin and pale but smiling, sitting next to a little girl with dark braids. The girl was holding up a drawing, grinning at the camera. Elena told me that Mia is terrified of authority figures, his mother explained. Her father, David, was abusive. Not physically, but emotionally. He would scream at Elena in front of Mia, would threaten to call the police and say Elena was an unfit mother if she ever tried to leave him. Mia grew up terrified that police or social workers would take her away from her mom. When Elena got sick and the hospital sent social workers to help with arrangements, Mia would hide in her room. So, when she ended up in foster care, she panicked, his mother finished. Elena told me she'd been preparing Mia, teaching her to be brave, teaching her about me and how I would help. But Mia is just a little girl, a scared, traumatized little girl who just lost her mother. Of course she ran. Daniel opened the journal to the last entry. There's one more thing you need to see. He showed his mother Elena's final words, written in shaky handwriting that was barely legible. My dearest Mia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer, couldn't watch you grow up, couldn't be there for all the moments I wanted to share with you. But I need you to be brave now, braver than you've ever been. Find Mrs. Lily Chen on Riverside Drive. She lives at number 447. She was my best friend and she will help you get to Grandma Rose in Portland. Grandma is waiting for you with open arms. She loves you so much even though you haven't met her yet. Take this journal with you. It's my heart, my love, my entire soul written on these pages. When you're older, when you can understand, read it. Know that everything I did for you. Know that you were loved more than any child has ever been loved. Be brave, my beautiful girl, be strong. And remember, I'm always with you. Always, I love you forever and beyond. Mom. Daniel's mother was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. That poor baby. She's been trying to find me this whole time. We need to find her, Daniel said, standing up. Right now, before something happens to her. His mother stood too, wiping her eyes. Where do we even start? Daniel thought about the little girl on the train, about the route she'd taken, about where she'd gotten off. I think I know. She's been riding the trains looking for Riverside Drive. She probably doesn't understand that it's a long street, that there are hundreds of addresses. She's looking for someone who knows you. Then we go to the train stations, his mother said, already grabbing her coat. We ride the routes, we search every platform, every station near Riverside Drive. And we bring this, Daniel said, holding up the journal. If we see her, she'll recognize it. She'll know we're here to help. They were out the door within minutes, both of them driven by the same desperate need to find this little girl before night fell, before something terrible happened, before Elena's final wish was lost forever. They started at the station where Daniel had seen Mia that morning. It was rush hour now and the platform was packed with commuters heading home. Daniel and his mother pushed through the crowd, scanning every face, looking for a small girl with dark braids and an oversized backpack. Nothing. They rode the train to the next station, then the next, getting off at each stop to search the platforms. Daniel's mother showed Elena's photograph to anyone who would stop long enough to look. Most people shook their heads and hurried past, too caught up in their own lives to care about a missing child. But some people stopped. Some people looked at the photo with concern. A few even promised to keep an eye out. We should call the police, Daniel said as they boarded their fourth train. Tell them we know where she's trying to go. I already reported what I know, his mother said, clutching the photograph tightly. But they have limited resources. One missing foster child among thousands of cases. Unless there's evidence of immediate danger, they can't dedicate officers to searching train stations. But she's 7 years old and alone on the streets. I know, his mother said, her voice breaking. Believe me, I know. They searched for 3 hours. 3 hours of riding trains, checking platforms, showing the photograph to strangers. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the city. The temperature was dropping. Daniel thought about Mia's thin purple jacket and felt sick. At the 6th station, a coffee cart vendor squinted at the photograph and nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I saw her. Little girl with braids, right? Big backpack? Daniel's heart leaped. When? Where? This morning, maybe around 8. She was sitting over there. He pointed to a bench near the far end of the platform. She sat there for like an hour, just watching people. I remember because she looked so serious, not like a normal kid. She kept staring at the street signs. Did you see where she went? The vendor shrugged. Sorry, man. Got busy with the morning rush. When I looked up again, she was gone. It wasn't much, but it was something. At least they knew she'd been here, that she was real, that Daniel hadn't imagined the whole encounter. They kept searching. At the 8th station, they found another clue. A woman working at a newsstand remembered seeing a little girl matching Mia's description that afternoon. She came in and asked if I knew where Riverside Drive was. The woman said. I told her it's a long street, that she'd need to be more specific. She looked so disappointed. Then she asked if I knew a Mrs. Chen. I said, honey, Chen is a pretty common name. Do you know her address? But the girl just shook her head and left. Which way did she go? Lily asked urgently. The woman pointed toward the east exit. That way. But that was hours ago. Maybe around 3 o'clock. Daniel and his mother hurried in that direction, emerging onto a busy street lined with shops and restaurants. People rushed past in both directions, everyone focused on getting home. How were they supposed to find one small girl in a city of millions? We need to think like her, Daniel said, stopping on the sidewalk. She's looking for Riverside Drive, but she doesn't have an address. What would she do? His mother closed her eyes, thinking. She'd look for street signs. She'd stay near areas with a lot of people, places where she might overhear someone mention Riverside Drive or the name Chen. And she'd need to eat. She'd need somewhere to rest. They started checking every park, every library, every public space within a mile radius of the station. The city was huge and they were just 2 people, but they couldn't give up. Not when a little girl was out there alone, cold and scared and trying to fulfill her dying mother's last wish. As darkness fell completely, they found themselves in a small neighborhood park. It was mostly empty now, just a few dog walkers and joggers. Daniel's feet hurt from walking and his mother looked exhausted, but neither of them suggested stopping. Maybe we should split up, Daniel said. Cover more ground. No, his mother said firmly. We stay together. I'm not losing track of you, too. They sat on a bench to rest for a moment. Daniel pulled out the journal, running his fingers over the worn leather cover. He thought about Elena, about how she'd fought so hard to protect her daughter, how she'd planned and saved and made arrangements. And then the system had failed, and Mia had ended up alone and terrified. Tell me more about Elena, Daniel said. What was she like before everything fell apart? His mother smiled sadly. She was wonderful. So warm and caring. She wanted to be a nurse, but she couldn't afford the schooling. So she worked as a nurse's aide. She was good at it too. Patients loved her. She had this way of making people feel safe, like everything was going to be okay even when it wasn't. How did she end up with someone like David? He was charming at first. Aren't they always? He swept her off her feet, made big promises, acted like she was the center of his universe. By the time she realized who he really was, she was already in too deep. His mother paused. I've thought about it so much over the past few weeks. If I'd stayed in touch, if I'd been there, maybe I could have helped her leave him sooner. Maybe things would have been different. You can't blame yourself. I know, but I do anyway. She looked at Daniel with tired eyes. When she called me 2 months ago, I barely recognized her voice. She sounded so weak. But you know what? She wasn't calling to ask for pity or sympathy. She was calling because she needed help with Mia. Even dying, even at her absolute lowest point, she was still fighting for her daughter. That's the kind of mother she was. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. Then Daniel heard something. A small sound like a whimper or a sob coming from somewhere nearby. He stood up quickly, looking around. The park was nearly empty now, just shadows and streetlights. But there, near a cluster of bushes at the far end, he saw movement. Stay here, he whispered to his mother, then walked slowly toward the bushes. As he got closer, he could make out a shape huddled on the ground. A small shape with a large backpack. Mia, he called softly. The shape went very still. Mia, my name is Daniel. I'm Lily Chen's son, your mom's friend, the lady from Riverside Drive. Slowly, a face emerged from behind the bushes. Even in the dim light, Daniel recognized her. The same serious eyes, the same dark braids, now messy and tangled. But she looked different than she had this morning. Smaller somehow. More fragile. Her face was dirty and her purple jacket had a tear in the sleeve. You read it? She whispered. You read my mama's journal? Every word, Daniel said, crouching down to her level but keeping his distance, not wanting to scare her. And I found Mrs. Chen. She's been looking everywhere for you. Really? Mia's voice was so small, so full of desperate hope that it broke Daniel's heart. Really? She's right over there. He gestured toward the bench where his mother waited. She knew your mama. She was her best friend, and she promised to help you get to your grandma in Portland. Mia started crying then, not loud sobs but quiet tears that streamed down her dirty cheeks. I've been looking for so long. I didn't know which house. I didn't know how to find her. And I was so scared the police would find me first and take me back to that place. The foster home? She nodded. They were nice, but they weren't mama. And they said I couldn't take my backpack to school, that I had to leave it at the house. But Mama said to never let it go. She said everything important is in here. She clutched the backpack tighter, so I left. I had to find Mrs. Chen. Mama said she would help. She will, Daniel promised. We both will. But Mia, you must be so hungry and cold. When did you last eat? This morning. A lady at the train station gave me a muffin. That was almost 12 hours ago. Come on, let's get you something to eat. But Mia didn't move. How do I know you're really Mrs. Chen's son? How do I know you're not lying? It was a smart question. Despite everything, despite being alone and scared for days, this little girl was still cautious, still protecting herself. Elena had taught her well. Daniel pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was from last Christmas, Daniel and his mother standing in front of a decorated tree, both wearing silly holiday sweaters and grinning at the camera. That's Mrs. Chen, he said. My mom, and that's me. We live at 447 Riverside Drive, just like your mama wrote in the journal. Mia studied the photo carefully, then looked back at Daniel. Mama said to trust people who smile with their eyes. You smiled at me once on the train. That's why I gave you the journal. I remember. Daniel said softly. That was a few weeks ago, wasn't it? She nodded. Mama and I were going to the hospital for her treatment. You were reading on your phone, but when I looked at you, you looked up and smiled. A real smile. Most people don't really see me. Well, I see you now, and my mom is dying to meet you. She's been so worried. We've been searching for you all evening. Mia hesitated for another moment, then slowly stood up. She was so small, barely reaching Daniel's waist. Her legs were shaky, probably from sitting in the cold for so long. They walked back to the bench together. When Lily saw them approaching, she gasped and stood up, her hands flying to her mouth. Oh my God, she breathed. Mia! Mia stopped walking, suddenly shy. She looked up at Daniel, as if asking for permission to trust this woman. He nodded encouragingly. Your mama was my friend, Lily said, her voice gentle. One of my best friends. She told me all about you. She said you were brave and smart, and that you loved strawberry ice cream, and that you were learning to play the piano. Mia's eyes widened. She told you about the piano? She told me lots of things. She showed me pictures. She loved you so much, sweetheart. So very much. That's when Mia finally broke. She ran forward and collapsed into Lily's arms, sobbing like her heart was breaking. And maybe it was. This little girl had been carrying an impossible burden for weeks, staying strong while her mother died, running from foster care, searching for a stranger in a huge city, all alone. But she wasn't alone anymore. Lily held her tight, rocking her G